April 9th, 1917, 0530, east of Arras. A corporal named Thomas Briggs thumbs a safety pin from a finned bomb and drops it into a short steel tube sunk into chalk. One breath, one dull thump, one black puff on the German parapet 50 yards beyond the forward trench. He does it again, and again. By the 10th round in 30 seconds, the German machine gun that had survived the night's bombardment is silent. The creeping barrage is already moving. The infantry start forward. And the thing that has them looking twice is not the horizon-filling guns, but this squat tube spitting bombs as fast as a man can feed it. The numbers look wrong. Not a 100-weight piece dragged by horses, not a weapon that needs a survey team, but a 3-inch mortar carried by a handful of men. A rate of fire that in practice, bursts of 25 to 30 rounds per minute, sounds like a drum roll in the mist. A bomb of roughly 10 pounds hitting in a tight oval where someone points a gloved finger. Local fire for local targets. The shock for the Germans is not just the explosions, it's the speed. We cut wide. The Battle of Arras opens along a 14-mile front, British 1st and 3rd Armies striking in sleet, snow, and ground, churned by months of artillery preparation. The headline assets are obvious: thousands of guns, a meticulously timed creeping barrage, mine craters, tunneling operations, and the promise of breakthrough on the scarp. But just behind the foremost waves, moving up like porters with a purpose, are trench mortar batteries with something new. Stokes mortars distributed down to battalions, pushed forward into shell holes, carried in sections, broken down and reassembled in minutes. By first light, across multiple divisional sectors, the pattern is set. Where wire remains, smoke falls. Where a strong point keeps barking after the guns have passed, high explosive lands, bracketed and walked in with hand signals. And where the barrage steps off the map, Stokes crews add a layer of precision that is not elegant, but is fast. The question that hangs over the morning is simple. Why does this small tube matter in a battle defined by heaviness? The answer starts 2 years earlier. In 1915, the British Army adopts a light mortar designed by Wilfred Stokes. Simple, smooth-bored, muzzle-loaded, with a drop-fire striker fixed in the base. No rifling, no recoil system beyond a base plate and the earth beneath it. Its job is everything that big guns do poorly at close range. Smash a machine gun nest around the corner, lay smoke where a platoon needs it, collapse a forward sap. It is the antithesis of heavy trench artillery. It gives infantry their own dial tone to fire support. And by April 1917, its quirks are understood and drilled. Arras is the proof. The plan commits not only central artillery schedules, but decentralized fires. Trench mortar batteries previously hoarded at brigade level are cut up, attached to battalions, told to move with the attack, and given ammunition scales that make them a factor. A Stokes detachment, 6 to 8 men, depending on the day, can carry the tube baseplate and bipod, with teams of carriers following behind with canvas buckets or crates of bombs. It is not elegant, it is logistics by muscle, but it is near to the fight, and near matters. It begins in the wire. At 05:15 on April 9th, a divisional staff officer clocks the last of the preliminary shells. The creeping barrage is set to advance at a rate measured in yards per minute, with lifts pre-timed to the second. It will pulverize trenches, shatter parapets, and carve lanes of safety. But the wire is not consistent, and the German forward zone, redoubts and machine gun posts with overlapping fields, is stubborn where it counts. In several sectors, gaps are insufficient, or a belt survives where a knoll deflects the blast. On a conventional timetable, those gaps become choke points. But across the flat, platoon commanders wave to the men with the mortar. Briggs's team is one of dozens. They do not calculate ranges with tables as a guns battery would. They roughly set elevation, take bearing by compass or simple sighting, and adjust by fall of shot. A runner from the left platoon shouts over the barrage noise, points to a stump marking a strong point. 2 smoke bombs first. A thin gray curtain forms in 20 seconds. Then 4 high-explosive, stepped 5 yards at a time, until the rusted door vanishes from memory inside a gust of chalk. Infantry rush. They go through. By 6:10, reports filtered back to battalion command posts tell the same story. Where Stokes crews are close, resistance folds faster. Where they are late, German machine guns take their toll. The numbers give it shape. An individual Stokes tube can hurl several hundred pounds of explosive in a 5-minute window at a single target. Its bombs, with simple fuses and fin stabilization, drop steeply and clear parapets that direct-fire weapons cannot. And its smoke, crude in chemistry but quick to bloom, builds microscreens on demand. The German reaction is immediate and conflicted. Their frontline regiments are used to British trench mortars, plum pudding, heavy types that groan before they strike, long-arc missiles you can spot and avoid if you are lucky. They know Minenwerfer, heavy, mechanical, centrally sighted. They do not expect a light mortar with this tempo to be everywhere, all at once. That is the shock. It is not the sound alone, but the loss of the safe interval between the end of the barrage and the arrival of the first grenades. The Stokes erases that interval. A forward company near Fushi finds itself in the center of a case study. The creeping barrage has lifted from the front trench to the support line. An MG-08 crew that survived in a concrete niche drags its weapon to the lip, takes aim at a blown hedge where khaki shapes flicker. Before the first burst is sustained, 3 Stokes bombs strike in a line that slices the parapet to the left of the niche. A 4th hits the firing step. The MG-08 is intact, but the crew is not at their gun. They are face down, and the infantry pass. The bomb fragments do not care about doctrine. By 7:30, the first weights of the surprise show up in capture reports. In several sectors of the 9th, Scottish Division and the 4th Division, prisoners remark on small mortars firing very fast and on smoke screens that appeared at once when we began to fire. A German battalion in the Oppie sector, maintaining communications under the barrage, reports light Mörser activity so close that counterfire is impossible without striking their own front. The detail is consistent: speed, proximity, precision limited but good enough under fire. It is the good enough that changes the pace. Stokes bombs do not always kill. They drive men down, they blind, they break routines. We zoom up to see the mesh. The British plan at Arras is a layered one: heavy artillery to tear, field artillery to sweep, machine guns to rake, infantry to occupy, engineers to clear, tanks where terrain permits, and trench mortars to solve the residuals. The Stokes is the solution for residuals. A residual is everything left over when the map has been obeyed, but the ground has not: a stubborn post, an angled trench that the barrage missed, a dugout mouth spitting rifle grenades, a wire belt with a standing section thick as a fence. Because Stokes tubes are distributed, their employment looks like noise. It is not. It is a local system of request, response, and advance. One pattern repeats. The first wave hits an obstruction. The supporting wave flags down a Stokes crew. The crew drops 5 to 10 bombs over a minute. Smoke rises. The block dissolves. The advance resumes. Multiply that by dozens of lanes, and the creeping barrage's elegant schedule meets a messy but effective swarm of microfires. What happened next made the pattern obvious. By the afternoon of April 9th, on the northern approaches where Vimy Ridge has fallen to the Canadians and the British right is chewing forward along the Scarpe, German counterattacks try to reimpose order. Their doctrine expects the British barrage to move on. It expects a fragile window when British infantry consolidate under thin cover and before their guns adjust. It expects Minenwerfer and machine guns to seize that moment. But in sector after sector, as German infantry bunch in shallow folds to assemble, smoke bursts blossom on their forms. Not a distant gas shell with a signature green cross, not a heavy mortar's slow lob, but Stokes smoke, immediate and local, placed in front of the forming line. The numbers tell a different story. In a single battalion sector, 3 Stokes tubes expend more than 600 rounds on April 9, most of them smoke and HE in alternating packets, carried forward in waves by ammunition parties cycling back to the original jump-off line. The distance from dump to tube is measured in hundreds of yards, not miles. Each round weighs roughly 10 pounds. Every 100 rounds is half a ton moved by men over broken chalk. This is what makes the effect possible and what limits it: human backhaul. In the rain and sleet, men become the logistics train. The contrast grows sharper by April 10th. The main offensive continues. German defense thickens in depth. The British narrative shifts from breakthrough to exploitation and consolidation. It is precisely in this phase, when the big guns retime their programs and the infantry learn a new ground, that the Stokes earns its second reputation as a close-in fort killer. German field fortifications, their reinforced concrete MEBIS positions, are resilient. Commanders' reports note that field guns at flat trajectories often cannot neutralize a loophole without collateral damage to the trench the British now occupy. A Stokes bomb, dropped steeply, will. It smashes through thin roofs. It detonates inside a room that a shell sliding parallel might miss. Reports from the 51st Highland Division note strong points knocked out by mortar teams less than 200 yards from the target, with adjustment by whistle. We go micro again. April 11th, near Monchy-le-Preux. A platoon pinned by a machine gun, sighted to rake the sunken road. Lewis gunners cannot see the exact slit. Rifle grenadiers cannot get the angle. The Stokes crew, guided by a lance corporal who counted paces to a distinctive shattered cart, sets the bipod at a crude elevation. 4 bombs. The first falls short, chalk spray. The second lands to the right, metal clatter, a scream. The third disappears into the loophole. The burst is muffled. The fourth is insurance. The platoon rises. The close-in cadence of infantry tactics, from prone to rush, now includes a mortar pulse. Until this moment, the audience, soldiers, staff, and the enemy, views trench mortars as a supplement. After Arras, they begin to look like a nervous system. The reveal sits in the reach of the Stokes beyond killing power. It's smoke. In the morning of April 9th, smoke is used tactically to cloud a machine gun. By the following week, commanders are using Stokes smoke to shape the battlefield at company scale, to hide reliefs, to veil wiring parties, to mask consolidations, to confuse observers. The numbers bear it. A mortar team can create a 50-yard wide opaque screen in under 2 minutes with coordinated firing, renew it in pulses, and shift it with wind in mind. The small tube, it turns out, gives infantry something artillery can't on demand: controllable visibility. This changes German behavior. Their observers on Vimy Ridge and beyond the Scarpe, deprived of clear lines at critical moments, rely more on sound, on pre-laid defensive fires, and on forward machine guns. Those machine guns, key to the defense, find their survivability blunted by sudden, localized HE and smoke they cannot predict. The psychological arc is not complicated. A heavy shell frightens, but it is part of a known pattern. A small weapon that appears without warning wherever a British platoon feels threatened alters routine. Men adapt by staying deeper, by hesitating before setting up a gun, by using ammunition differently. Hesitation is time. Time is space. Space is ground gained. By April 14th, as the British fight to hold Monchy and to push past Roe, the limits bite. Ammunition expenditure for Stokes mortars strains carrying parties. Firing at peak rates for minutes cooks tubes. Crews learn to pulse, to swap tubes, to swab. Fuses sometimes fail. Bombs bury and pop late. Safety arcs are hard in crater fields. Friendly fire is a real risk in smoke and sleet. Yet the system holds because it is simple. No complex breach to jam. No recoil mechanism to fail. A steel tube, a base plate, a bipod, a striker pin that either works or doesn't. When it does so at a tempo that is new to 1917. Look at it from the German side for the reveal that reframes what came before. Their doctrine, refined through 1916, leans on elastic defense in depth, on flexible strongpoints, on machine guns sighted for enfilade, and on Minenwerfer for close support. The timetables of British artillery are studied, counter batteries are set in motion, counterattacks are drilled. Into this, the Stokes mortar introduces a variable that German calculations do not fully account for: decentralized, instantaneous, platoon-level indirect fire that can appear inside the gap between scheduled bombardment and the forward rush. It collapses the blackout period that frontline machine gun teams rely on, the seconds when British gunners lift and infantry have not yet closed. If artillery is the hammer and infantry the hand, the Stokes makes the two continuous. The inversion lands best when we return to the opening lane, where once a surviving gun had space to bark, 1 belt, 2 belts a pause. Now it barely gets a line of tracer before a mortar crew nearby drops 3 bombs into its vicinity. The MG-08 vanishes not because a distant battery plotted it, but because a corporal judged the distance and the angle with his eye and countdown in his head. Not top-down firepower, but bottom-up initiative. Not steel mass alone, but steel tempo. Thesis in a line: at Arras, the Stokes mortar turned local initiative into local firepower. erasing the enemy's safe interval and shocking German frontline units with its speed. The consequences carry forward. Through the spring and into 1918, British and Dominion formations institutionalize what Arras proved, that light mortars belong not in reserve parks, but beside the platoon. Training pamphlets dwell on mortar drills, on how to carry the bomb loads, on when to smoke and when to smash. Ammunition scales adjust, dumps come forward, carrying parties are scheduled like blood flow. The Stokes becomes a constant presence in assault and defense. In raids, its sudden HE and smoke define the opening seconds. In withdrawals, its screens deny observation. In consolidations, its bombs disorganize the first counterthrust. The weapon's simplicity, a virtue in the mud, allows factories to produce at scale. By late 1917, there are enough tubes to guarantee that every serious attack has them close to hand. German adaptation is swift but constrained by physics. They add more light mortars of their own. They adjust countermeasures, snipers tasked to pick off mortar layers, forward patrols trained to hunt the telltale splash of smoke, artillery called to shell likely mortar positions. They learn to feint, to hold back machine guns until smoke drifts, to push forward maneuver for detachments. But the tempo advantage of the Stokes remains because its loop is so tight. See target, read distance, drop bomb, adjust by sight. No request chain, no map correction, no wait. We zoom out to the systemic picture. Arras was never going to be just about mortars. The opening day gains exceeded those at the Somme bloodied start. Terrain, weather, and the German defensive depth set their own ceilings. But the Stokes altered the shape of effort at the edges where battles are won or held. Consider a hypothetical lane 150 yards wide, one of hundreds. In 1916, with artillery alone and rifle grenades, a surviving machine gun could disrupt that lane for minutes. Casualties mount, the attack hesitates, the creeping barrage moves on, the window closes. In 1917, with Stokes, the same lane stalls for seconds. A mortar pulse drops, smoke blooms, the lane moves again, the barrage remains relevant. Multiply seconds saved across dozens of stalls, and the first day's energy sustains for hours, not moments. The numbers ground it. A typical Stokes bomb carries an explosive filler on the order of a pound, depending on mark, and throws fragments lethal within yards, but frightening across a small field. At 20 rounds per minute sustained, a 2-minute burst is 40 bombs, 400 pounds of thrown steel and explosive, a fog of fragments over a strong point. That is not the smashing power of a shell fired from a 60-pounder. It is not meant to be. It is the precision of suppressive effect at platoon distance. Measured another way, if a single tube can deliver that effect 6 times in an hour at alternating targets, it is equivalent to a sequence of squad-level breaches forced under cover of smoke, none of which would have been possible with rifles alone. Time matters in defense, too. At Arras, German counterattacks, sharp, doctrine true, launched by companies and battalions, rely on spotting British consolidation before it becomes a position. But if every attempt to mass is met by Stokes smoke, their observation window closes. If covering machine guns are themselves vulnerable to a weapon that does not need to see a loophole precisely to render it unsafe, their arcs are broken. The downstream effect is not always visible in maps. It shows up in prisoner reports of confusion, in ammunition returns that show belts unfired because guns were not sighted, in minor place names that never become major because they fall before they can be written into dispatches. We return to the human machine that makes all this run. A Stokes team at Arras is not anonymous. It is a set of hands cut and blistered by carrying bombs. It is a gnur, one on the mortar, often a lance corporal, who knows how much chalk to scoop under the base plate to keep it from walking back with each shot. It is a runner who memorizes the location of the ammo dump and the safe path through the trench and shell holes. It is a sergeant with a watch who listens to the barrage clock and makes choices. Fire now and risk a cooking off in the tube, or hold and risk leaving the platoon cold. The glamour is thin. The responsibility is heavy. Their effect is outsized. One by one, small narratives layer into the system. A new army battalion, green to major offensives, learns to trust the mortar's smoke to shield a flanking rush. A regular battalion, tight on discipline, drills elevation changes so each bomb walks 5 yards like steps. A territorial unit, short on men, uses the Stokes as a multiplier at night, hammering suspected assembly points at irregular intervals so the enemy doubts his own readiness. The weapon is a behavior change engine. It rewards initiative, punishes hesitance, and bends the local pattern toward motion. By late April, the offensive's initial thrust is spent. The city of Arras lies behind the British line. The Drocourt-Quéant switch line remains distant. The Scarpe runs like a hard contour. The weather has punished both sides. The death toll is heavy. The story of the Stokes mortar within this is not that it decided the battle alone. It is that it introduced a capability at the company level that felt new enough to be labeled by those on the receiving end as shocking. The German shock is not theatrical. It is procedural. It is the realization, repeated too many times in too many lanes, that the old calculus, survive the barrage, rise to fire, hold the interval, no longer holds. The memory hardens into method. When the British Army fights later in 1917 on 3rd Ypres Mud, when the Canadians take Passchendaele, when the Germans launch their own offensives in 1918, the light mortar's logic persists. Other armies absorb the lesson. The trajectory from Stokes to post-war infantry mortars is direct. Portable tubes that extend the platoon's reach, smoke to shape, HE to suppress, speed to decide. The Stokes at Arras is the first time the British show it, not as a curiosity, but as an integrated solution. We close the loop with numbers that settle the case. At Arras's opening day, British units advance farther on some sectors than any day since the war's first months, over 3 miles on Vimy Ridge. The artillery is decisive in making that possible. The Stokes is decisive in preserving it at the edges. Across multiple divisions, hundreds of mortar rounds per battalion sector are fired on April 9th alone. The distribution of tubes down to battalions and sometimes to companies multiplies presence. Rates of fire that look like exaggeration on paper become routine in after-action notes. 20 rounds a minute sustained, bursts faster when the number one's rhythm holds and the tube is cool. The moral is austere. In an industrial war, innovation is often imagined as bigger. At Arras, the innovation that shocked was smaller, lighter, closer. It did not obliterate positions from miles away. It gave platoons their own indirect fire in seconds. It blurred the line between artillery and infantry. It made visibility a weapon in itself. And it stole, from an enemy trained to use time as a shield, the tiny interval in which a man stands to his gun and believes he is safe. April 9, 1917, 0530, east of Arras. The same chalk, the same tube, the same corporal dropping bombs from a pocket-sized stash. Where a machine gun had barked itself into history the previous summer, now it manages a burst and a half before disappearing into dust. Not through mass alone, but through tempo. Not through distant fire, but through a small weapon in the hands of a nearby man. The Stokes mortar at Arras makes that difference felt, and for the Germans who expected the old rhythm, that difference is shock. What remains at the end is not a device, but a principle. When you compress the distance between seeing and striking, when you push decision-making to the smallest unit that can act, you change the shape of battle. The British did that here with a steel tube and human backs. The Germans learned it the hard way, in seconds, at the front of trenches, with names that are now dots on a map. The last line is a quiet one. Power is not only the weight of steel a nation can throw, but the speed with which a handful of men can decide to use it.